How you doing? Conor Dempster. I'm going to be going over the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. So the first thing about the book. So Four Agreements is, I don't want to call it a necessarily self-help book, but I would like to say a self-enlightening book. Um, Talking about the agreements that which we make in our lives, whether they be positive or negative, that really shape how we act and who we are. Um, So it initially started about talking about the Toltec, an Indian civilization, who looked at the world as like a dream, and that we control that dream, and the agreements that we make with ourselves and with others, um, and not necessarily an agreement in the terms of like, all right, you're gonna give me this and I'm gonna give you that. We can agree on something. It's like what we tell ourselves in our mind when we hear, experience, or do something. Example that they used in the book would be like, if I were to sing a song and someone said, "Oh, you're terrible at singing," whether that be the case or not, if I believe in my heart and my mind that I am actually terrible, I'm making an agreement to that. So it's talking about how agreement shapes our lives and how we can control these agreements, how we can combat negative agreements, embrace positive agreements, and really better ourselves through um, not simple changes, but minute things throughout the day that can lead up to a lot more happiness in your life. They take hard work, yet they are subtle changes that add up together. Um, so the first agreement was to be impeccable with your word. Being impeccable with your word, it's not like keeping a promise, like you have my word that I'm going to do this. That's part of it, but just being able to have value in what you say and speak positively, not to speak negatively, because your word has its effect. The second agreement, which is I feel like my favorite, is don't take anything too personally, or don't take anything personally at all, rather. I think this is important just because in certain situations, especially us as teachers, Rowan, HPE major, um, I think dealing with kids, especially, you tend to be in certain situations where a kid may be in a bad mood or something and they lash out at you, even though you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. And rather than realize that there's X amount of things going on in this kid's life or yada, 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 we tend to take it personally. And I'm a victim of that as well. And I think it's just quote unquote natural. But it really isn't. It's something that's learned. It's an agreement that we made that when someone says something bad to us or something that we don't necessarily agree with, we tend to think that that person is talking about us specifically and that it is our fault or our, for lack of better words, our fault that they are acting that way. When in fact it is them who have something going on in their life and their actions or their experience is why they are acting their certain way. It could be towards us or towards anybody else, but it's not the person who's receiving it. It's the person who's spreading that. Um, so I think that one's pretty important as teachers. The third agreement is to not make assumptions. Um, this I felt like was pretty important in relationships, whether it be romantic relationships or relationship with people. Um, Too many times, and I'm a victim of this as well. Like I expected people to do certain things for me that I don't want to use the wordage I shouldn't have, but I probably shouldn't have. In terms of communication, I mean, we assume that people are going to do what we want them to do. And that's just unfair and it's impossible because everybody's got different views and opinions on certain things. And in order for us to know what each other wants, we need to be able to communicate rather than assume. Because if I assume that someone's going to do something and then they don't do exactly what I assumed, if I had assumed that already, I'm going to feel a sense of letdown or that they didn't do enough for me, or whatever the case may be. And then the fourth agreement, and this is like the action of the first three, is to always do your best. I think that that one is pretty self-explanatory. You want to try your best to apply these agreements whenever you can, but just because you're trying quote your best, that doesn't mean it's going to be the same every day. It's going to be the best that you have at that moment. Sometimes it's going to be, for lack of better terminology, like sometimes your best is going to be at 50% of capacity, or your best is going to be 100%. You never know. It's just that in any given situation, whether it's agreements and anything in life, just always do your best. Um, so my biggest takeaway um, was the fact that in the beginning it talked about perfect and how our sense of perfect is, and our agreements with perfect and the standards of perfection, and how we self abuse ourselves for it. Because we have a need to be loved and accepted, and in order to feel that in our minds, that we've been conditioned and domesticated to believe, is that there are standards of perfection, but there's really no such thing as perfection, as cliche as it is to say. And in order for us to um, adopt these new agreements, I mean, we need to stop looking at things as quote unquote perfect and look at them for what they actually are. And then that's us. And we determine our self wealth and our mental state and our mental health. Obviously, there's external factors that play a part in that, but too many times people are looking for a certain thing rather than just being who they are. Um, and they abuse themselves over it. And I think that's a shame. And I think that the way in which Don Miguel Ruiz broached that topic and did that so in the very beginning of the book, um, right after the whole Toltec introduction, I think that was really good, because I mean it is the main problem that probably leads to everything else. Um, because whether it be appearance, job, finances, I mean, there's a standard that which people hold themselves to that isn't necessarily realistic. And then to go into the agreements after that, I thought that was really good. How I incorporate this in my life, I kind of briefly mentioned it already, but being a teacher, I'm definitely going to try and not take anything personally. Professor talked about it in class one time, and I mean it's something that's just natural, I think. But that's only natural because it's ingrained in us, and I think working to um, omit that from daily routine or teaching style, I think that would be really beneficial. Also, with the self abuse, uh, I don't think anyone is ever not going to have certain things that they dislike about themselves, but I think learning to embrace things and adhering to the agreements will in turn lead to a betterment in my own life. Um, so yeah, overall, I did like the book. It kind of lost me when it was dealing with like the Toltecs and um, some of that kind of more spiritual stuff. Not overly spiritual, but and it's not that I couldn't understand it. It's more of along the lines that it was just kind of losing me. During the meat and bones behind the book, I thought it was really good. It was definitely a way in which you can see things in a different light, and I thought that was really good. Um, I definitely think it can help people in their lives in order to break the status quo as to what we should feel and think about ourselves. Like the one example that I thought was great in the book. It was talking about the normal way human acts, and before any learned behaviors or agreements, and it's like you're a child, and the way in which your normalcy is hindered is by responsibility, and how, like, you use the example of being a lawyer in the class, being a lawyer a court. Like, you can go on the weekend, you're out clowning around with your friends and whatnot, and then you go to work, you put that serious face on, you're in the courtroom, and it's just it takes the, I don't want to say it takes the fun out of life, but when you're so responsibility driven to the cost of you living your normal life, I think that's a detriment. And I think if people can realize that, I think everyone would be happier as a whole. Um, any other thoughts? Not particularly. Um, one thing I do want to mention is, like I said, I'm not very spiritual, but the one thing that I took away from the spiritual aspect, was that it there was a passage that said heaven can happen while you're alive. You just have to learn how to see it, and that was huge. That was a huge thing that stood out to me, because I'm not necessarily a devout follower of any specific faith. I would consider myself a Christian. I do believe there's a God. I don't think you have to be in church every Sunday for Him to hear you. I think everyone's got their own relationship. Um, as far as the heaven and hell, I don't know. I'm just gonna be plain about that. I don't know, but I feel like the way in which, um, I look at it, and after reading or hearing that passage, um, that's going to be the one I choose to believe, because this is all I know. This being here on this earth is all I know. And there's good days and there's bad days. Some days feel like heaven, some days feel like hell. But when it comes to your outlook on the day, how you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, how you treat others, how they treat you, I think adhering to these agreements, or at least trying your best, hitting that fourth agreement, I think using those things can have more days of heaven and more days of hell in your life. And that's going to be something I definitely take away long term. So, yeah, that is my interpretation. I thank you very much for listening, and have a great night.